A quick word before we get into this week's episode.
I was talking to a head of school recently who said, Peter, we've got a strong strategic plan, but every time we try to act on it, things stall. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Big goals are easy to write down, but they often get bogged down in the daily, making it hard to stay strategic. That's why I built the school operating system. It's a framework that helps you align your team and focus your priorities so you can actually execute the plan. We work alongside you to extrapolate a one-year plan from your existing strategic plan, break it into 90-day sprints, and design a much more effective meeting rhythm that moves your team closer to your strategic vision every single day. And that's just the start. We support much more to help you build the operational infrastructure your plan needs to succeed. If you're serious about making traction this year, let's talk. Visit moonshotos.com/SOS. That's MOONSHOTOS.com/SOS to learn more and set up a time to chat about the school operating system. Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am so excited to be joined by two friends, Barbara Egan, who's the chief strategist and head of StoryScape, and Torsie Judkins, who is the head of school at Wingra School in Madison, Wisconsin, which holds a special place in my heart. Go Badgers. We're here today to talk about, how can a school really take control of word of mouth and make sure that the proper perceptions of school are out there in the community, obviously, to increase, as part of your enrollment strategy. So we're going to dig into all that in just a little bit. Really excited to learn more. But before we do that, Barbara, Torsie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey, before we get going, I'd love to have you two introduce yourselves and your organizations. That would be fantastic.
I'm Barbara Egan. My company is StoryScape. We work with independent schools all over the country with market research, messaging, and word of mouth training. And I love what I do. It's been over 10 years with the same team doing this. I went to Rumsey Hall and Loomis Chaffee, so my world has come full circle, and Torsie is one of my favorite clients of the year.
Thank you, Barbara. So I'm Torsie Judkins, the head of school at the Wingra School in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a small K-8 progressive school not far from the University of Wisconsin. It's been around since 1972, and we like every other independent school, and we're just trying to increase enrollment. And my journey, this is my 27th year in independent schools. I started off at Durham Academy as a student, so I'm the product of an independent school. Then I worked at Durham Academy for 9 years, moved to New York for many years, and also lived in Pennsylvania. So lots of independent school experience, mostly in the enrollment and admissions arena.
I'm curious. So, what was the starting point for your collaboration? I mean, what was the challenge or the opportunity that you're looking to pursue at Wingra, Torsie?
Well, what attracted me the most to Wingra was the work they were really trying to do around social justice and really trying to increase the diversity in the student body, and the socioeconomic piece. They were really trying to create a school that was available to anyone who was interested, no matter what their financial background was. So that's what attracted me to the school. But on the business side of that comes a lot, like to be sustainable. So when I arrived, our enrollment was down, and I was trying to find ways to increase the enrollment. So we tried commercials. We tried, every advertising that you can imagine. And then I happened to bump into my friend Barbara at an Isaacs conference, and then again at EMA conference in Boston. And we started talking about word of mouth and the best way to advertise your school is from within. And so she and I came together, and we started this wonderful process of the power of storytelling and how Wingra can tell their story in the best possible way.
Yeah, and it sounds like through your work, you were able to distill it to what are the top 3 things that every family should know about the school. I'd love to understand, what was the process to getting there, and at the end of the day, what's the outcome? Why is that clarity so important for your community?
Well, Barbara, why don't you start off by letting Peter know how we had to get to that, how we had to come to that process.
Right, exactly. So, when Torsie says he tried everything and nothing was working, if you don't have your message right, none of this is going to work, right? So yes, you have to get your channels right. You have to know where your audience is. However, you really need to speak to them in a way that will resonate. And we know we have short attention spans. There's a lot of information out there. There are 3 things at most people can remember about anything, and that's on a great day, right? So in order for people to fully understand what's happening on these campuses, we have to whittle away and prioritize the 3 things that are going to grab people's attention and have them say, I didn't know that about Wingra, or, oh, tell me more. That's interesting. I thought that was true, but you said it a little bit differently. Something to catch them off, really changing the way that they think about the school in general so that you can uncover all the other amazing things that happen. So in order to get to those 3 things, simple is hard. It takes a process. We use market research because really when we let the data speak, it takes all subjectivity out of it. And what happens when you show up, and Torsie, you could speak for Wingra, but when I show up to campuses, one board member thinks we should talk about this. The teachers are all talking about this. There's all this conversation because there's so many amazing things, but none of it is resonating because it's too much and it's not consistent.
Yeah. So you had to start with that research process?
We did. We start with, we do 2 rounds of market research. And when we say market research, we are, of course, doing a competitive scan to see what the bar is and what the landscape looks like. But really what we do is we survey families. We survey families who are newly enrolled to the school. We survey families who were accepted to the school but chose elsewhere, and families who inquired to the school and did not complete an application. And then we talk to them in a second round of research with interviews. So we get that market standpoint quite clear. And that really pushes against any of those subjective agendas on what people think internally we should be talking about. Right.
So were there any surprises? Well, what were the 3 things? Were there any surprises that came out? Or what did the research tell you? Torsie, were you surprised by it at all?
I was not surprised. I think our internal community was surprised because so many people had their view of Wingra, and, like our board chair, he was a former student and a current parent. And so he was completely sold. And when he started to hear some of the, some information Barbara was gathering from this market research, he couldn't believe it. And so so that was interesting. None of it surprised me, being in enrollment and admissions for a long time. But it did surprise many of our community members.
So how did you distill it? How did you get it down to the 3 things, and what are they?
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think a lot of schools that are in the position of either being smaller or progressive or K through 8 and aren't in that rarefied air of already having an amazing reputation, right? There's a lot of confusion as to the value. Is it worth it? Are they really learning? And Wingra, for instance, some of the surprises are around, they have multi-age classrooms. And that is, we all know internally, we all know the benefits of that. When we go to the market and ask if that's a priority, what we're hearing from families who are not sophisticated in edu-speak or why the school's structured the way it is, they say, oh, were those kids left behind? Are they not able to hack it in public school? Right. So all of a sudden, the celebration of multi-age classroom early on really takes a back seat because it was more of a turnoff than something that was exciting. Their academics, or the rigor, I'll put in quotes, around the work that happens on campus was getting diminished because of that reputation. Right. So another example is they spend a ton of time outdoors. There's learning everywhere. And it's not a Montessori, but it is a progressive school. And so people were coming to the school with this perception of Montessori and feeling like the kids are playing, not learning, or it's fine to a certain point, but then they've got to go. Right. So where we ended up is around this concept of these are thriving learners. Right. And there's learning everywhere. There's the learning zone, which means if you see kids outside, it's because they're doing some STEM research about something they learned in history. Right. So it's pulling forward some of the things that families value and merging that with what's happening so well on campus. So you're able to tell the story in a way that resonates with people who don't get how schools are structured.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing it right, you're like, "Hey, look, we talk about it this way in kind of quote unquote edu speak, but really the market doesn't care about that. The market wants to understand it from their perspective." Is that am I hearing that right?
Families are most interested in the benefit to their child, not interested on what you do as a school. They want to know, how is my kid going to do here? And we have to speak to them in a way that makes sense. And it's not necessarily, I'm not even going to say it's dumbing it down. It's not. It's just providing access to all the beautiful things that happen in a way that they would understand. And then they get to learn it more. And you can throw some of that language, even language like progressive schools. Some people think that just means progressive politically. Some schools are, but really this is about a different way to learn. It has nothing to do with those adult fights in the world, right? So that's what we try to do. Put it in the vernacular of the families, merge what's important to them with what the school does well, and elevate it to the top most important things on families' minds.
I'll give an example. We had a family. I'm outside when kids arrive and I go out for dismissal. So I get a chance to talk to parents every morning and every afternoon. And one of the parents came to me yesterday and they said, Torsie, I didn't know if it's a parent of a kindergarten student. I didn't know if I believed in this learning outside so much. I thought they were just playing. But then Sam came home and told me that they were collecting sticks for a little fort that they were building. And he collected 157 sticks. And his mom said, "You counted to 157?" So the amount of math that was in that lesson is something that, now that they're here, they're understanding. So I'm like, okay, great. It's a perfect opportunity from a word of mouth standpoint to talk about how much learning outside is important to us.
Well, it sounds like the student was doing the word of mouth work for you, right? Yeah. I'm curious. So you distilled it to these things, right? You're putting it in the vernacular of the parents. Was there any internal friction? Like now all of a sudden you're going to start talking about things differently?
You want to, well, how about you talk about your external view of our internal friction?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a growth moment, right? And with growth, there's always a little discomfort as a rule. And then Torsie can talk specifically about Wingra, right? There's variety levels of openness to the concept of who is this person, what is this process, which is why we rely so heavily on market research. This isn't my opinion. This is us collecting data and helping you put your best foot forward. So once we do some work to bring people along, to have the research is super transparent, but even so, people are very attached to the way that they speak about a school. They live it every day, right? So we have to make sure they understand that it's not that you can't show that passion and enjoyment every day in the way you talk about it, but to get people interested that are on the fringe, not yet in your world, we have to think about what matters most to them. So, oftentimes in storytelling workshops, I'll have them rewrite it in their own words so that they can feel like they own it. And that's a big sigh of relief for them, right? That's like, oh, they're not giving me the script. I get to put it in my own words. Then when they start practicing it, they're falling back on their old ways. And that's when we can point out, okay, I see what you did here. Although you brought up we get to go outside without talking about it as the learning zone. And therefore, people are reverting back to their idea of Montessori or playing. Right. And so what we need to do is make sure we connect those dots for them. So people are quite humble and also quite aware of stepping in that. And frankly, every school I've gone to works really hard through it, but it's not something that's natural at first. And with discipline and constant storytelling, you really start to see the community beat to the same drum and tell multiple stories around the same strategy. And that's when there is even retention and more internal pride, because we all remember why we're here, right? That other stuff falls to the wayside. So yes, a little growing pain at first, and then pointing it out in a really constructive way and some working through it. And then we see schools thrive. Torsie, tell me about Wingra, what happened on the inside for you?
Yeah, I think trying to decide, if you speak to, our staff and alumni and students, even recent graduates who are in high school. I spoke to a couple because my daughters go to high school now with some Wingra grads. Getting to those three was a challenge for people because well, there's 20. Why do I have to have just three? Or, you tell the story about the learning zone differently than me. But then I've really understood now that families come through. I gave a tour the other day. I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. To go down to those three, to narrow it down to three and to be able to communicate that to a visiting family, they understand this complicated school a lot better. So yeah, there was some internal, butting heads, because why just these three? Why can't we talk about these other things? And so that's what we bumped it, because we did it with our workshops that Barbara led with us, were with board members, were with our staff. We had all school teachers, we had classroom teachers, administrators, and Johanna and I, my director of market admissions and enrollment, she and I will be doing storytelling workshops with our families and alumni. So there'll be some more internal conflicts coming up.
But I love what Barbara said about with growth comes discomfort.
Yeah.
And isn't that what you take that mentality into the classroom every day, right? Like there is going to be discomfort with learning new things. So I really appreciate that framing. And I'm curious. So, you just mentioned, Torsie, that you gave a tour and you applied the three components to it. How has that changed the way you're kind of welcoming families onto campus as they're considering the school?
Well, I feel like we have a better strategy now, right? I feel like giving tours, I was trying to customize it to every family. I said something different every time. But now having a clear vision about who we are as an institution really helps me and anyone else giving tours.
And now a word from our sponsor. Leading a school today can mean juggling a dozen different systems across offices, finance, fundraising, marketing, enrollment, and academics, all pulling your attention in different directions. At Blackbaud, we believe it shouldn't be that way. That's why we built Blackbaud's Total School Solution. It's a fully connected solution designed for private and independent school leaders who want a clear view of their entire operation. From tuition to transcript to donation, you get one ecosystem, one login, and one source of truth. This isn't about more software. It's about smarter strategy. When your systems work together, you spend less time chasing down data and more time leading. Want to see what Blackbaud's Total School Solution could do for your school? Visit blackbaud.com. That's BLACKBAUD.com to learn more.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's made a difference in terms of the experience that people, as they're leaving, are they leaving campus saying, are they reiterating those three things? Are they then contributing to that word of mouth?
We hope so. I mean, Barbara really just finished this work this summer. I mean, end of the school year. So, we're using it as we get into the 26, 27 admission cycle. Right. So we're just getting started. We're just giving tours. Applications go live, here in the next 2 weeks. And, but I think as an internal institution and who we are and how we go out and talk about the school, it's, we've got our big fundraising gala coming up in November. And as we talk to local people about coming, I think it's really helped us as an institution.
Yeah. And I imagine it's going to get stronger and stronger with each passing month, right?
That's the hope.
Yeah. No, it takes, it's like anything. It's like, if you're going to run a marathon and you haven't run in, 5 months, 6 months, you're probably not going to start running 26 miles. You're going to run a half mile. Not, it just takes a lot of repetitions,
I find that, so we hear from all the schools that they start to parrot back what they've heard on their tour or what they're seeing in the materials. That's kind of the first sign. So, Peter, you were kind of tipping the hand there that does happen. And then what we start to see is an increase in inquiries, because ideally limiting it to these three and tailoring tours to those three things and not the whole building, or giving stories around it. People can relay stories a whole lot more than tell me about Wingra. They could say, oh my gosh, there was a kid who counted to 159 and their child didn't think they counted up to 20, whatever the story might be. And, at that point, we start to see more questions. And that's what we want. We want more questions so that we can learn who's mission aligned and keep them engaged. And as we move them through, you start to see more inquiries, not just the amount of questions per inquiry, but more people interested, because you're getting a lot of, I didn't know that about Wingra, or I thought differently about Wingra, right? And then from there, it trickles into applicants and then enrollees.
Did, does this cascade to other parts? I mean, obviously, the word of mouth, the training of families, staff, and whatnot. But like, did this contribute to overhauling, the messaging on your website? Are you looking at are you getting as granular as looking at like your admission application and changing the language there?
That's a great question. Absolutely. We're actually moving to a new website in the next 2 weeks. And so it starts there. And then we do want to get into we're looking at, retention of our staff too, as well. So I think it was the start of how we view ourselves and if we can if we can be around for another 53 years as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Hey, I want to dig more into how you brought, faculty and trustees along in this process. What did that look like, and were there any surprises along the way?
No, we have a very active board who are eager to participate, and they still really use it as guiding principles now, Barbara. When we have our board meetings and how we conduct our board meetings and the role of a trustee, and how they communicate things. So the progressive school model and everyone having a voice. On our end, it wasn't hard to get folks involved.
And Peter, just to talk about that for a quick minute from my standpoint and process, we work with a very inclusive, I call it an advisory committee, where I ask Torsie and all schools to collect a cross-function set of people that can represent unique point of views and can also have the hard conversations in that room, right? Because what we need people to feel like is that we didn't have it happen in a vacuum, and they can radiate the information out on what's going on and how the project's going. Because when we leave that room together, people should say, like, this team's working really hard to make sure we're putting our best foot forward. And I feel like there's a good representation of cross ideas in that room. So that team follows us along through the entire process. But at the beginning of the process, we do focus groups on campus with existing faculty and staff and existing families. And I really do want people to feel like they had their moment to sit there, to have my email, to check in when they want. I think I got a couple of follow-ups from those meetings, Torsie, just people saying, I didn't want to say this in the room, but here's my idea. And, those are quite healthy to receive. But what I find is, that's very important in terms of the health of the project and making sure I understand what's happening on campus. In reality, I'm very focused on what's being said off campus because that's what a brand is, right? And we sometimes mix up a parent satisfaction issue or a curriculum decision with a brand perception. And so what I need to hear is from people who are not living it every day and see what they think from the outside, and then find that overlap of what they want, what they think you do well, or they don't know that you do well yet. And what are those things that feel really passionate internally with the faculty and staff and existing family. And that's how we come up with these ideas, right? Anytime we come to them, I say, I didn't make these up. I heard them from you and I validated them with the market. So, I have this silly cartoon about like, we didn't herd cats and tell you how it goes. Like we literally listen. We do a deep listen.
And so that segment of the market where you're getting that feedback, so those are families who applied but didn't enroll, or are you going to like the inquiry pool, maybe people who dropped off?
So we do talk to both, actually. So we first hear from everybody who's currently on campus, but then we talk to the newly enrolled families. So they're just fresh in the world and they bought what Wingra has to offer and they're super excited. And then we talked to the ones who were so close but chose elsewhere. And then, of course, the inquiry pool of you have my name and information, but I didn't move forward. And so the further away you get from the school, obviously, the further the information is accurate to what's going on with campus.
And I do want to say, Peter, the most valuable part of this process for me, especially being new to the area, was those folks, the further you got away from the school. Because I would drop my girls off at soccer and go to, a local spot and meet people. And they're like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, I'm the head of school at Wingra. Oh, I had a neighbor 3 years ago who had a friend that went there. And I heard that. And I was getting all of these bizarre, crazy rumors and stories about how our school was being run from people who were so far removed. And that's when I really needed to reach out to Barbara. because they were telling our story for us around town. And this is a small enough place, especially the west side of Madison, that, you know, someone tells a story that's not accurate, it will turn away people from applying to your school.
Yeah, that word of mouth, you just can never, you can never underestimate how powerful it is.
Yep. And in fact, some folks, you know, Barbara, and she can talk a little bit more about this process, but there were a couple of people that she said, you know, Torsie, some of it's background noise, but these people were people you really should reach out to, because they have a really bad taste in their mouth about something at school. And so it really worked out well. I got the kind of personality that I had no problem with reaching out to them and become really good friends with one person who didn't like our school at all. But it's that was very valuable and important information that Barbara gave me.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just add to that, because everything I do, I say is anonymous and confidential, all these conversations and surveys. When somebody's on the phone with me and really pouring their heart out, and it sounds like it would be very helpful to the school and the school should know that, I will say, listen, this is anonymous and confidential. I'm looking for themes, but if you're comfortable and you'd like to follow up with someone internally, would you like me to pass along your information? And just a high level summary of what I'm hearing, but somehow the loop can be closed, or are you just letting me know? And so in this instance, they said, no, I'd love to talk to them. So that was a great moment. Sometimes I get schools that say, who said that or what? And I'm not giving it up. Like, the only way this works effective is when people feel like it's safe, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. I'm curious, you know, so if a school's listening to this and they're like, this is really interesting, I'd love to do this work, but I just don't have the budget for it right now. Are there some simple steps that they could take today?
What I would recommend to schools is that do some internal work to identify, if you had to figure out 3 things that to talk about your school, what would those 3 things be? Right. And those 3 things, really, you're stabbing in the dark without that market research, but at least you're going to be getting a consistent brand message out there, right, that feels authentic to you. Whether or not that resonates the most, you will only know in time. However, really narrow it down to how you speak. It should not be a fire hose of information. It's what are those 3 things? And I always suggest schools say something interesting, not obvious. Right. So to say Wingra School is a pre-K through 8 progressive school in Madison, Wisconsin, you just spent 20 seconds on somebody with very limited attention span. So to say, let them find that out online. Be like, we have a school of thriving learners. Learning zones are everywhere. Those are 2 things. They're not even 3, right? Someone might say, whoa, that's interesting. Tell me more.
What I appreciate about all that, you know, Barbara, when you said, like, you know, Wingra is a progressive K-8 in West Madison, I mean, like, that may have worked for a long time, you know, for my generation, my parents' generation, but, you know, with the generation of millennial parents and this like really leaning into values, and do your values as a school align with our values as a family, what you're doing is you're leading with values. Like, I'm hearing that's all I heard in those three things.
Yeah. And I often say less I, more why, right? So if you're talking about it in terms of Wingra is blah, 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 as opposed to why Wingra, right? If your child comes to Wingra, they will be a thriving learner. Not they will be in 5th grade with people who are also in 6th grade. Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. It's, you know, that's interesting, not obvious. And that's how we were really able to get to 3 things, like rewinding back to that. Because when people say things about Wingra, they say very obvious things, right? We sit on a hill overlooking Lake Wingra, you know, all of a mile away from Camp Randall football stadium. Those are very obvious things that you can see. So
how does that benefit their child? That's the answer.
Yeah.
Yep. Hey, as we begin to wrap things up, I'm curious, as you've now gone through this process, you're rolling it out and you're incorporating in all these different ways. What was the biggest impact in your mind to date? And how do you just make sure this thing keeps evolving?
For us, I think the biggest impact, again, is being on the same page, and it's helped build community even more. I feel like when we've come together to talk about what's important to us as an institution. So Barbara really got us together We're not just talking about scheduling. We're not just talking about tuition increases. We're really talking about these things that make us different and that are important. So the community building piece has been really great. It also gives, it empowers our current families with some tools to go out and something that they love and adore for their kids, they can pass along to people in the community. And that's been something that's been very important. And I just feel like we know who we are. We just know who we are, better than ever before.
Yeah, that's great. Barbara Egan, Chief Strategist and Head of StoryScape, and Torsie Judkins, Head of School at Wingra School. Thank you both. I do have one last question. If somebody wants to reach out, what's the best way for them to get a hold of each of you?
My email is began@story-scape.com.
That's the best email I've ever heard. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah. And I'm easy. I'm just Torsie, Torsie at wingraschool.org. So, and that's WINGRA. So
Fantastic. Torsie, Barbara, thank you both. This is such interesting work, and certainly you've gotten my mind spinning, and I thank you for that. So thanks again.
Thank you,
thanks for
Peter.
having us, Peter.
Yeah.